Hi, I'm Matthew Sadler, and welcome to this video, the next in my series dealing with the games between Emanuel Lasker and Frank Marshall. And today we are having a look at a game from the World Championship match played in 1907 between Lasker and Marshall. And Lasker won this match extremely convincingly. He won 8 games and drew 7. And lost none at all. So a really convincing result there. In all fairness, I think that Marshall became somewhat disheartened towards the end of the match and lost the last 4 games of the match in quite rapid succession. I don't think that would have happened if he'd been facing a normal situation. But still, it was a very, very impressive result. The first game of the match is very, very famous. It features, first of all, a piece sacrifice by Lasker and then a fantastic endgame. And it's been dealt with in many different sources. So I thought I'd start by focusing on the second game. So this was played with Lasker leading 1-0 in the match. And it was a very interesting game. And Lasker, Marshall played the opening very, very well, got a promising situation, and then Lasker took an extraordinary decision, which Marshall did not react well to, and that was enough to get Lasker a 2-0 lead in the match. But it could have been a little different maybe. So Lasker started off with e4, and Marshall played e6, and this was a variation that Lasker played a few times in the match with reasonable success actually. But Marshall reacted pretty well with c5. And c takes d4, a very direct, concrete way of playing. And after bishop d5, bishop d7, Lasker's already got to be a little bit careful here. So if d takes e6, then bishop b5 simply wins a piece, as knight b5, queen a5 check is rather embarrassing. So Lasker took on d7, queen d7, d takes e6, and actually I think already f takes e6. Knight e2, knight c6, knight f3, e5 is looking pretty promising for black. So it's been a pretty big success, this opening. However, Marshall took with a queen on e6, which is probably slightly less good, but very aggressive as well. What can you say? I mean, black's developing his pieces quickly. And from the black point of view, you've got to be reasonably happy like this, especially being an attacking player like Marshall. Lasker probably didn't play the very best long here. This move from Marshall was a little bit weird, forcing h3. On the other hand, it was maybe a conscious decision in actual fact. With a pawn on h3, then obviously g5 to g4 will actually open up the king side compared to if the pawn was still on h2. And if black brings a knight to e4, then when you've played h3, f2 to f3 is a lot more risky, because then the knight can come into g3. So maybe this was just a conscious weakening from Marshall. After knight d3, though, I mean, I would have played bishop d6 here if I'd been Marshall, and then knight e4, g5, and this is looking quite dangerous for white, I have to say. Marshall played maybe less actively, less concretely, and played knight e4, queen f4, and queen d5. And this is a very interesting moment in the match. I mean, things aren't too bad for white here, really. But I think that Lasker was probably afraid that Marshall was going to play g5 and then f5 and just develop an initiative. And he took an incredibly risky decision that, yes, you're never quite sure, but that I presume he'd calculated quite precisely in order to, actually seen that white had an awful lot of surprising defensive resources here. I mean, he played what looks like a suicidal option here. He went check and queen takes g7, grabbing this pawn, but obviously opening the g-file, and with a queen on d5, also pointing towards the knight on f3 and pawn on g2. This looks pretty scary. But in actual fact, in this position, Marshall probably made a mistake already. yeah, it's actually, well, very surprising in actual fact. I think the very best move, I thought, and the engine seems to confirm it, was to play the move knight d2. So if knight takes d2, then we go rook g8. Attacking the queen, if the queen moves, and it's mate on g2. So white's got to play this move knight f4, and then I go queen d6. And there's no way for white to protect this knight on f4. So white's either got to put the queen on f7, or it could play knight c4, or could play the queen to h7. Let's have a look at some of the weaker options first of all. I mean, if you go knight c4, queen f4, and then a move like queen f6, then wow, that happened quickly. Let me just do that again. I go rook g2, king g2, rook g8 check, and this is going to be mate. King h1, there's queen f3 check. So black's got to keep control of this g8 square. That's very, very important. So that means that you know, that either queen f7 or queen takes h7 is going to be the best. Queen h7 is a little unfortunate because after queen f4, rook ad1, I mean, I think it is best just to keep that knight defending the f3 square, and just in general keep it close to the king's side. Then black has this clever idea, queen g5, g3 and rook d7, which is actually trapping the white queen on h7. Now white can get out of it with h4, queen g4, queen h6, but after f4, I mean, this is really very dangerous for white. It's actually, my engine thinks that that black is actually winning in this position. You know, that's not completely obvious to me just looking at it, but I mean, I would definitely take black in this position any day. So queen h7 is rather risky. Probably the best move is to play this move queen f7, and after queen f4, then rook ad1. And funnily enough, after something like rook g6, doubling up onto the g file, you know, with rook d g8, the very best move is to go g3 here and actually force white to force black to actually take the perpetual check with rook g3 takes queen g3, king h1, queen h3, king 8 there, queen g3, and perpetual check. The idea about g3 is that white's, if black played a calm move like queen b8, then queen g6 is simply the idea, followed by g takes f4. So yeah, I mean, in actual fact, this was actually Marshall's best chance, and actually probably his only chance to avoid being worse in this position. So from that point of view, I mean, queen g4 takes g7 is a very clever move. On the other hand, I mean, it's also very fraught for white. So white's also taking quite a few risks by doing this. It's very easy for white to go wrong in this position. I mean, Marshall went rook g8, and Lasker played this very good move, queen h6. The idea is that with queen h6, white's actually stopping this idea of knight d2, or at least making it a lot less strong. For example, if knight d2, queen d2, this is actually what happened in the game, queen f3, g3, h5, and queen f4. This was the game continuation. White's neutralizing everything, a pawn up, and black's got weaknesses everywhere. Now, what I actually thought that that black was still okay with rook d6, still had some very dangerous play. And indeed, black does have dangerous play, but white is actually doing quite well here. Now, after rook d6, the key idea is that a move like queen h7 allows knight to f6, which is just killing. Queen h4, queen takes f3, just winning a piece. So white's basically, yeah, I mean, if white goes queen h4, for example, then this move knight d2 is enormously strong now. So white's got to remain on this c1 h6 diagonal to stop black from going knight d2. And there's two possibilities. There's queen f4, which is actually the best move. I rejected it too quickly, which is why I started looking at queen c1 for white. And I'm glad I did, because there are the most beautiful variations in actual fact. So after queen c1, let's have a look at that first. Black goes rook d g6. Big threat against g2, but white seems to have a few little ideas. Either knight h4 or knight f4, attacking the rook on g6 and also covering the pawn on g2. However, after a move like knight h4, then we have this very strong move, rook takes g2 check, knight g2, and then a very typical idea, knight c3. What I'm threatening with knight c3, obviously, is queen g2 mate, and I'm also threatening knight to e2 check, forking the queen on c1 and the king on g1. So white's got this idea, knight f4, attacking the queen on d5 and also covering the e2 square. But now this move is very strong, rook g2. Obviously, knight g2, I go knight e2 check. I take the queen, and then I'm getting in with knight e5 to f3. I mean, it's going to be very, very dangerous. And the nicest thing, though, is if you go king h1, I've got this very strong move, queen f3. It's really very important to get the move order right in this position. And I think you'll spot that knight g2, queen h3, king g1, knight e2 check is quite a gorgeous little mate there. So that's one variation, knight h4, but there's maybe a rather more dangerous looking move. That's knight f4, attacking the queen on d5 and also just threatening to take the rook on g6. But here it gets quite beautiful. So I go rook g2 check again. And now if knight g2, I've got this this very strong idea here. Well, I've got a number of strong ideas actually. I mean, knight c3 is quite nasty, and I also think that knight d2 is extremely nasty for white. Yeah, that's the idea I wanted to play. Knight e1, I go knight f3 check, king h1, I go knight takes e1, which is pretty killing. But white's actually got a cunning move here, which took me only about 30 seconds to refute, but it was quite interesting. King h1. So with king h1, white's just saying, trying to get the queen, attacking the queen. If the queen moves away from d5, then taking on g2 is a lot more tempting. But black has got an absolutely wonderful resource here. So I'm just going to give you, I don't know, 10 seconds just to think about it. You can pause the video if you want to guess. It's a fantastic tactical resource. Okay, it is knight to e5. So what's the idea of this? Well, if knight takes d5, I go knight f3. I'm threatening a mate on h2, and white can counter with queen f4, covering h2, threatening mate on c7. But then I've got this beautiful mate, rook takes, and knight f2 check. Absolutely gorgeous. If white goes knight takes e5, and there's quite another gorgeous mate here. Knight f2 check, rook takes f2, rook g1, king f2, and queen h1 mate. Absolutely beautiful. Power of the major pieces there. And if you go knight takes g2, it's the best move, but I go knight f3 here, queen f4, knight ed2. And this is really, really horrible for white. Black's gonna get at least the exchange back, and well, he's also gonna pile into to the king side here. This is just going to be winning for black. So knight e5 is an incredible idea, and yeah, I mean, it just seems basically that queen c1 is just, well, virtually losing in actual fact. That's the basic conclusion. So I was getting pretty optimistic about it because I thought that queen f4 was nothing more than a draw. I mean, I looked at knight d2, queen d2, queen f3, which you actually have tempo up on the game. You've got a rook on d6, which looks like quite a useful move. But actually still white plays g3, rook d g6 now, and then knight f4. And actually there's nothing for black to do. Rook g3 doesn't get you anywhere. And otherwise white's just going to consolidate. I mean, it costs white a bit more effort than in the game, but it's still, good enough. But what I thought you could do is you could go rook dg6. Because after all, the queen on f4 is stopping knight f4, so there's one, major resource that's disappeared. And if white goes g3, then I thought that this move was good enough for a draw. Obviously, king h1, rook h3 check is terminal. This move, I thought this was gorgeous, actually. I go queen e4 check. And if king d1, then I've got queen e2 check, which is rather lovely. And obviously queen e4, f takes e4 is rather painful for white. And funnily enough, if you go king h2, I just check here and come rook g3. And there's actually no good way for white to avoid the the draw by repetition. For example, a move like rook f2, I just go rook takes check, takes, and then this knight is hanging. So that's actually all pretty nice. Unfortunately, in my enthusiasm, I got a bit carried away here because white can play knight h4, and which I'd rejected due to knight c3, the standard, double attack threatening knight e2. But yeah, unfortunately, you just play queen f5 check, takes, knight takes, rook check, king there, and well, you're actually just going to end up a pawn down in an ending. I mean, I think this is better than the game because white's pawns are damaged and black's a little bit active, but all the same, you're still a pawn down in an endgame. So it's not particularly what you're looking for. So that's actually I find that amazing. It looks like this move queen g4 takes g7 with best play, and black had to be very accurate. It's a draw after knight d2. And after rook g8, queen h6, black's already worse. Quite amazing. I'm very intrigued to know how much Lasker saw when he calculated this, because it's a very, very brave decision. Just show you a little bit of what happened in the game. It was all rather tragic for Marshall. I mean, Lasker's just either swapping off pieces or attacking weaknesses, and I mean, Marshall tried his best, but he was never going to save this. So a very interesting game. In a way, a bit of a tragedy for Marshall. That he had a very nice position, a very good position for him too. With plenty of attacking play, and still he lost that one. But some very clever play from Lasker, really setting a crisis and asking Marshall to find a concrete solution. And maybe Marshall, after losing that first game, biggest event of his career, desperate to do well in front of his home crowd in the US Championship, maybe that pressure just got to Marshall. I mean, it's actually quite an interesting fact that I was reading through Marshall's book of best games. A very entertaining read, but when he's talking about the period 1907, he doesn't mention the match against Lasker at all. Doesn't give any games from the match, despite there being a number of quite exciting ones. But doesn't even mention the match at all. Must have been a pretty a pretty bad experience for him to lose the match that way. And maybe at that moment you understand that that you're not going to become a world champion, that the gap is just too big. But anyway, that seems to have been a really desperately disappointing experience for him. But anyway, I mean, I think it's wrong to ignore the match, really, because I think that despite the result, I think that Marshall played an awful lot of good chess as well, an awful lot of creative, inventive chess, and it came short against Marshall, against Lasker, but still, it was very, very interesting play. And well, I mean, that was just game 2, and there's plenty more to come. So keep watching this space.